Hi, I'm Billy, and if you're watching this, you probably already know who I am, since the only reason I put this on YouTube was to make it easier to share with friends and family. But if you don't, welcome! What the fuck are you doing here? What kind of algorithmic rabbit hole did you go down to get here? I'm putting this little disclaimer here to say that I made this for a college class, so the quality's kind of shit, and it's missing a lot of stuff because I had to follow a very strict time limit. Like, seriously, I had to cut out a lot of information. The original video was twice this length. I did so much fucking work that I'm still angry about it. I even had to cut out this joke about how Babylonian scholars are like the most laziest people ever. Seriously, there is a lot more to this subject than I talk about in this video. Although if you want to learn more about it, you can always look it up your damn self because I'm not making another video. This was fucking hard work. This little edited clip here, that's gonna be like an hour or two of my life gone just for this stupid little disclaimer. Anyways, here's the video. Enjoy. Beer. It's been around for thousands of years, has become the most popular alcoholic drink in the world, and has numerous varieties and flavors. But has it always been like that? What did ancient beer taste like? What did it look like? And how was it made? Well, today I'm going to teach you how the ancient Sumerians brewed beer based on a almost 4,000-year-old hymn to the goddess Ninkasi. First, we're going to talk a little bit about the history of beer, then we're going to talk about the recipe itself, and then we're going to actually make it. But before all that, who am I and why are you listening to a word that I say? I don't have any degrees, or I'm not an expert in anything, but I'll tell you what I am. I'm a mediocre white guy on the internet with an obsession of the ancient Sumerians. So that means I'm an expert in literally everything. So let's get into some history.
Beer is a natural process, so it was most likely discovered by accident and independently amongst different cultures. The oldest evidence that we have of purposeful fermentation is from 13,000-year-old pottery shards in Israel. The next oldest evidence is from a 5,000-year-old paycheck found in Sumer. This brings us to the hymn to the Sumerian goddess of beer, Ninkasi. Beer was a staple of Sumerian diets. Ancient beer had very little alcohol in it and was mostly consumed for its nutrients, but was also consumed as a social and sometimes religious beverage. In contrast to the modern brewing industry and marketing, ancient Sumerian brewing was considered women's work. Most breweries and taverns were owned and operated by women, and the earliest recorded queen was a tavern owner before she became a ruler. This is also why Ninkasi is a goddess. Now let's look at the hymn itself.
The hymn to Ninkasi starts off as a worship to the goddess Ninkasi and then transitions into a basic step-by-step instruction manual on how to brew beer. The four ingredients listed are water, malted barley, sweetwort made of dates and honey, and bapper, which is a form of bread made of barley and sweet aromatics. You may have noticed that the hymn doesn't ever mention yeast. In the Home Brewer's Companion, a few archaeologists proposed the popular theory that the yeast came from the bread. However, the high-temperature ovens the Sumerians were using would have almost certainly killed any yeast that would have been present in the bread. So let's go back and look at the sweetwort, or as it's referred to in the hymn, didda. According to Damarau, didda was a liquid that was a main ingredient in most Sumerian beers. We also know that this was stored in beer jugs. This is important because the Sumerians were very particular about keeping accurate records. And so when the Sumerians say that something is stored in beer jugs specifically, it's not too big of a stretch to assume that this liquid was probably also fermented. Most likely, didda was some form of yeast starter made from the leftovers of previous brews. In our case, it would be a kind of sweetened date wine. So now let's get into actually making this stuff. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is make the didda. Now, didda is really simple to make. All you got to do is combine 1 cup of date syrup, a half a cup of honey, and 1.5 cups of water. Stir that all together until incorporated. Then you're going to put it into a nice sterile jar and cover it with cheesecloth. Then all you have to do is wait. Now, you can either let it ferment from wild yeast that it picks up just from being left out at room temperature for a few days, or if you're like me, you can put in some yeast dredge left over from the last time you made Sumerian beer. Either way, we're just going to leave it out for a few days until it starts getting really bubbly. Okay, so while the didda is fermenting, we're going to make the bapper bread. Here, we're going to start with 340 grams of barley flour, 115 grams of malted barley flour, and to that we're going to add 1.5 teaspoons of ground cinnamon, 1.5 teaspoons of ground cardamom, and 1.5 teaspoons of ground coriander. Then we're going to whisk it all up so that everything is incorporated. Now we're going to add half a cup of honey and 1 cup of warm water. Then we're going to mix it into a sticky dough that clumps together. Next, we're going to shape them into flat patties onto a parchment-lined baking sheet. And then we're going to place them into a 375 degree Fahrenheit oven for 35 minutes. Then you're going to flip them and cook them for another 10 minutes. All right, so our bapper is baked and broken up into little bite-sized pieces, and our didda is fermenting and bubbling. Now we're going to take a jar and fill it with 2 cups of malted barley and about a gallon of boiling water that's been allowed to reach room temperature so that we don't kill the yeast. So now we're just going to add in the didda and the bread. Okay, you might end up with a little extra, and that's fine. You've got a bit of a snack. And now we're just going to put some cheesecloth over top of it and let it sit for 2 to 3 more days. All right, so it's been a few days and everything's nice and fermented, and we strained out the solids and are left with this very appealing looking brown muddy water. So let's see how it tastes. All right. Now, we also let this sit for about an hour. You don't have to do that, but you want to. So, now that we've got everything here, let's taste this. It's actually a lot better than I would expect. It tastes like a mixture between a light beer and a really fruity wine. Not something that you'd really taste in a modern day beer. And the herbs and spices really give it this sort of floral undertone. The closest thing that I can think of would be Dogfish Head Ale makes this stuff called Midas beer, which is a mixture of beer and wine. Although, funny enough, just like this, Midas beer is also a recreation of an ancient beer recipe. Yeah, this definitely doesn't taste like something that you would get in a modern day brewery. Although if you did, it'd probably be given to you by a bunch of bearded, flannel-wearing white dudes, as opposed to, women. Now, one thing to keep in mind is that they don't use hops in their beer, which means that their beer doesn't really have that great of a shelf life. And so that means that when they opened up a cask of beer, you drank it all. A big group of people would come around and they would drink all of it. And that's why it was traditionally drank out of these big basins. Now, I'm not a group of Sumerians. I know, surprising. So, in order to save this, because there's no way I'm going to drink this all in one sitting, I'm going to use a little bit of lime juice. Now, I know what you're going to say. Oh, citrus didn't show up in Mesopotamia until around 1200 BCE. Well, 1200 BCE is a lot closer than the 1st century CE, which is when the very first record of hops being used in brewing happened. And that was in modern-day Germany, which is a country famous for not being in Mesopotamia. So yeah, while ancient beer, it tastes different, and it's definitely made in a different way and by different people traditionally, it's still pretty good, and I would definitely recommend at least giving this a try. So thanks for watching.